Hello, this is Rishmita Kakal, and here we have a guest today who is going to actually enlighten us about trauma counseling, what is trauma, and how trauma therapy helps us. So, Aditi Ghatole is a counseling psychologist, and now I'm handing over to Aditi to tell us more about herself.
Hi, Rishmita. So I'm Aditi. I am working in an NGO which works for child sexual abuse. So I'm working primarily with children and their parents. I'm here today to talk with Rishmita about trauma and trauma counseling, and I want to explain it in the as simply as possible. So let's see how that goes.
It's so great to have you. So, let's just first start with can you explain us what is trauma exactly?
Yeah. Trauma is basically a physical, emotional, and psychological response to stress and fear. Trauma can be explained in various terms, but trauma is, it's very important to understand that trauma is very subjective. What is a traumatic incident for person A might not be a traumatic incident for person B. Like losing a pet can be very traumatic for a child, but in the same way, losing a pet for someone else might not be as traumatic. Undermining a person's experience can be very dangerous in therapy, especially. So I think that is something that we understand by the definition of trauma. It cannot ever be objective. Of course, we can define it. We can define the causes of it, but it cannot be completely objective. It has to be a subject. There has to be a subjective element to it.
Okay. Okay. So, Aditi, can you tell us what is trauma therapy or what is trauma counseling for a person who's coming up newly to the entire system of counseling?
Right. Trauma counseling aims at helping the person. Trauma is basically a response frozen in time, right? So, it is helping the person come out of it by of course, by counseling, by various activities, by engaging the person in a cognitive way. I think the first part of trauma counseling is understanding what the trauma is, like we spoke about, the subjectivity of it, where it is coming from, and then understanding the triggers that cause it. It is helping the person, your client, to understand those triggers themselves, to be more aware of what is happening to them, and then enabling them to use resources or helping them to jot out resources that can help them to face the trauma or to overcome the trauma. So it also aims at reprocessing the traumatic incidents. So a lot of people have flashbacks to the trauma, or they keep getting triggered. If a woman say was sexually violated on a subway, she will be very afraid of taking a train again. So it is helping the person to reprocess the traumatic event, to reprocess the associations with the traumatic event, and then use the resources uh, to cope better. So I think that is the aim of trauma therapy.
Okay. So, is trauma like with one incident or it could be multiple incidents?
Trauma, interestingly, can be is defined in three ways. So there's acute trauma, that is a single incident trauma, where one large incident takes place in your life, and you get flashbacks of it, you're triggered by it, so you're affected by it. It can be death of a spouse, death of a parent. It can be losing your limbs in an accident. It can be something major. Chronic trauma is defined as smaller incidences throughout your life. Say a child is living in a toxic home as in where the parents are continuously fighting. There is a lot of passive aggression. So the child will only have so there will be smaller incidents, but that will be the memory of the child. So it will be a culmination of those smaller incidents. And then there's a complex trauma, which is a mixture of both of these, where there's a one single incident as well as smaller incidences that cause trauma in that person, or cause that person to sort of react to it in a different way.
Okay. And is like the therapy applied on all of these three cases similar to each other, or there are three different ways that you encounter that?
So it will be sort of different. Uh, like, of course, the processing part will be similar, but the way you might approach those different incidences will be very different. So, a trauma, an acute trauma like sexual violence. If in therapy, one keeps asking about the incident, or one asks the client to describe the incident, uh, in therapy especially, it can be very triggering. So the ways of handling the kind of trauma will be very different. In chronic trauma, where it is the adult's childhood, or the relationship with their spouse, it will be very different, because talking about it will differ, or the trigger that it causes will differ. So it is sort of similar. The processing of it can be similar, but of course the approach will differ according to the incident. So it also depends on what kind of an incident it is.
Correct. Very individualistic approach. Obviously,
Yes,
one is different from each
of
other.
course, yeah.
Okay. Aditi, can you tell us about what do you think are the major causes of trauma? If you have to pick up like top three causes that you have seen in your field, which are the top three causes that you have seen trauma is the reason behind it?
um, so in my field, I'm mostly working with child sexual abuse. So, of course, the trauma of the incident, especially if it is someone who's close to you, someone who you know, is huge. But then there is something called re-traumatization, where the process that the child goes through after the trauma, or after coming out about the trauma, and the responses of the loved ones or the people around. So that can cause re-traumatization as well. It can be, so there is something called intergenerational trauma, where the trauma is passed through generations. So systemic violence like racial slavery, or oppression of the caste, or as we are seeing migrant workers now going to their home with their children. So that is a trauma that is passed through generations, where the effect of the trauma will not only last in that one person, it will be passed on to the next generation, because the child, or the child of the person will of course notice what is happening to their parents, and will therefore react in a particular way. So as we said, trauma is very subjective, so you can't really chalk out the top three causes of trauma. But of course the most common ones are sexual violence, or being attacked by something, being physically attacked, or assaulted or violated. Um,
And
but
especially for children who do not have a vocab also to share what's happening with them,
exactly,
have the vocab of saying someone has sexually harassed them or anything like that,
yes,
don't have the words to
yes.
share it with you. Correct.
So there have been so many incidences where the child was sexually abused. The person was sexually abused when they were children, but they did not realize it until very late in life. When they grew up and they knew about sexual violence, and how grooming is basically manipulating the child into believing that whatever they are doing is for the like the relationship in grooming between the abuser and the child is a very uh, it's full of trust. So the abuser makes the child trust on them. Um, so in such cases, there have been so many cases where an adult hasn't realized that they were sexually violated, or they were actually affected by something until later in life.
So how does that
So
affect their later life? Like because the child is not even aware that something like that had happened with him, and soon he realizes what
right,
happened, or she realizes whatever happened wasn't right.
right.
And that's the time. What is the effect on their long-term life after that? After the realization, if you have come across any such case?
Yeah. So of course it will alter the kind of relationships that the adult will have later in life. If they were abused by their mother, or someone who was supposed to be a care provider, they will have a very different relationship with people in future, because it will be very difficult to trust someone again. Because yes, so if it's a caregiver who's
Relationships are on trust, basically.
yes, as well as there will be a lot of esteem issues, where the person cannot trust themselves, because a lot of time when children are abused when they are quite younger, um, they don't know what is happening, and they think that their parents' reaction to it is normal, and that is the way it is supposed to be. And there is something wrong with them. There's nothing wrong with the parent.
Correct.
They grew up so they grew up thinking that, okay, it is because something I did wrong, or it is because I could have reacted in a different way there. So of course, trust will be heavily altered in any kind of relationship of the future. Um, there can be various things. It depends on the triggers. So there will be someone who was abused as a child will not want children because they will be afraid of taking care of them. Someone who was physically assaulted will be triggered by the violence they see in cinema. So there can be various reactions to this. It cannot, so it depends on the person. It depends on how their coping mechanism is. It depends on where they are in life, how they are taught to cope with the particular trauma, whether they are seeking help.
Okay. Great. So Aditi, tell us, what are some of the symptoms of trauma that tell you the person is suffering from a trauma? So how do you pick out that, yes, this person is going through a trauma?
Right. So the symptoms of trauma can be majorly divided into four parts. That is cognitive symptoms, behavioral symptoms, physical symptoms, and psychological symptoms. So cognitive symptoms are mostly, intrusive, something that goes on in your brain, in your prefrontal cortex especially, which is your thinking brain, where there are intrusive thoughts. Whenever I'm meditating, I am getting thoughts or flashbacks of the incidents, or there are visual images that are triggering me. There are visual images that are coming back. There's amnesia, that is loss of memory. I cannot recall things. I have a difficulty in recalling simple things like taking your wallet or taking your phone while going out. There are mood swings, of course. So these are the cognitive symptoms. Then there are behavioral symptoms where there's constant irritation, frustration. We avoid the memories that are triggering us. There is social isolation or not talking to anyone. Or it can be exactly opposite as well. So talking a lot or engaging in risky behaviors, lacking interest in activities that were previously really, we found really interesting, like a child who used to, play guitar will suddenly abandon it. It can be exactly opposite as well. We've seen children doing really well in exams after the traumatic incidents because it's their way of denying the entire incident, or it is their way of focusing somewhere else or coping in a different way. There are, of course, physical symptoms of trauma where where there's increased heart rate, there is anxiety attacks, insomnia, where that is sleeplessness, or too much of sleeping throughout the day. Of course, psychosomatic symptoms where there can be loss of function of a body, or I think
our audience is just any biological or body changes that are happening.
Any biological. There can be skin problems. It can, because like stress is known as a trigger for skin problems, but there is no real cause of the problem. It is just coming out.
So your body reacts to the trauma. You don't even realize.
Yes, that is your body. Yeah. That is your body's way of coping to the trauma or reacting to the trauma. So of course, like so anything that is of a stark difference than their previous behavior can be seen as a traumatic symptom.
Correct. So different from the previous of the trauma will be telling you there is some kind of effect of the trauma on you right now.
Yes. And of course, psychological symptoms like overthinking or overeating, or like some people have an obsessive compulsive trigger where they suddenly start washing their hands too much, hypervigilance, where they suddenly check whether the door is locked. There's a lot of guilt that is seen, especially after the incident, because a lot of children or even adult survivors of sexual violence or violence of any kind feel that it is their mistake, or it is something that they did that is causing the trauma, or that caused the incident. Of course, there's depression, there's anxiety. Depression because we sort of live in the past. We are constantly, repeating the incidents to ourselves, and anxiety because we are living in the future. We are constantly worried that it will happen to me again. It will,
It can
take place again. It can happen anytime to anyone.
again. I'll
There
be
is Yes, yes, and there is shock, there is disbelief, there is denial, um, there are panic attacks. So it is a combination of all of that, and it can be seen in varying aspects. Like it's not necessary that all the symptoms are seen in a person.
correct.
There can be smaller symptoms as well. So yeah,
Okay. Thanks, Aditi. So, what are some of the common responses that one gives to trauma, and how does it affect our brain at the end of the day?
right. So the first response of our body to trauma is defined in the flight, fight, and freeze response. So fight response is where the body is, ready and all charged up to fight the abuser or fight the traumatic event, fight the natural disaster. You know, in COVID, I think that can explain a lot of people who want to go out and who are like okay, they are okay with it harming them, or they are okay with getting the disease because they are just tired and they're tired of being at home, or they're too afraid of it, so they want to face it and they want to go ahead and uh, like fight it. Flight can be completely abstaining yourself from the incident, running away from the incident, being in denial. Um, yes, yes. So, completely shutting yourself off of the incident and doing something else, or going away from the person. And freeze response is where the person is shocked, so shocked that they cannot react to the incident and they are numb and they are just frozen in time, and they do not know how to react appropriately. Yes, to
So,
the particular incident.
sounds like they freeze physically, or there is a psychological freeze.
It can be a combination of course both. Physical freeze is a reaction to a psychological freezing, right? So when my brain is shut off, I will not be able to move, I will not be able to react, I will not be able to save myself, I'll be okay with whatever is going on. If someone is abusing me, I'll be okay with it because I don't know what to do.
Correct.
So it is a very common response to a traumatic incident. There is a fourth response, which can be seen in children where they are fidgeting or they're fooling around. They don't know, so they're not running away from the incident, they're not fighting, but they're doing something else, and they are sort of avoiding the entire thing.
Can we
So
say
that can be,
a distraction where they try to distract
yeah,
themselves?
yes, completely distract themselves from the entire incident. Also, the traumatic responses will be very different in different people. That is very important to understand. So initially when researchers used to describe it, it was always fight or flight, but there are many responses that can come out
Correct.
of the traumatic incident. So a lot of times when women are abused and they do not say anything or they cannot fight back, it is said that they enjoyed the incident or they were okay with it. Or the abusers often say that it was consensual because the person was consenting at that time. But it is very important to understand that at that time your brain will try to cope or survive in any way possible.
So, Aditi, can you tell us a little more about how trauma actually affects our brains?
Right. So, to understand this, I think we need to understand the limbic system of a body, which has a fear response, which has an emotional response to any kind of an incident. So, the limbic system consists of two primary things, that is amygdala and hippocampus. So, if I explain the structure to you, this is the amygdala, which is a almond-shaped, really tiny organ, which is primarily responsible for our fear response. So it is like a alarm clock for our body.
Okay, so if I
fire
remove
alarm for our body.
okay, so if I remove the amygdala, basically I won't be fearful anymore, right?
Exactly, exactly. And there's a hippocampus, which is located right above it, which is responsible for our long-term memory or episodic memory of any kind.
So can we say learning takes place over there?
Yeah, learning, primarily it is also known for storing learning memory or any kind of a new memory. um, so to understand this, any kind of an incident will have a response.
Aditi, great. Can you tell us, does trauma ever go away? Or if so, how do I let go of trauma? So there are two questions here. First, we'll tackle actually, does trauma ever leave you? Is it like if I am been through some kind of traumatic event, will I be able to ever get away from it?
Um, yes, of course, there is 100% possibility that a person can get out of the trauma that they are facing. It will require a lot of work. It will require a lot of engaging in different kind of behaviors. It will require a lot of therapy in cases, but there is a complete chance of recovering from trauma.
Aditi, can you tell me and the audience that what are some of the ways that one can cope in their daily life with the trauma? So, what are some of the practices that I can adapt if I'm going through a trauma?
Right. So the person can engage in mindfulness activities, mindfulness exercises, where or basically grounding exercises, which helps the person come to here and now of the situation rather than thinking about the past or the future. Uh, there are breathing exercises, breathing techniques, or 5 4 3 2 1, where you have to list down sensations around you. You have to list down 5 things that you're seeing, 4 things you can smell, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can touch,
So,
something
basically,
like that.
making them present
Yeah,
about the
it's
surrounding.
yeah. Especially in a triggered situation, I think that is something that can really help anyone who's engaging or using these activities. Play therapy is something that has been wonderful for children, where you're using play or you're using toys to sort of help the child come in the present. You're using coloring, you're using painting, you're using clay models.
So, when we talk about
um,
play therapy, are we talking about art based therapy as well?
yes, we are talking about art-based therapy, art-based way of engaging things. It can for adolescents or adults, it can be writing skills, it can be dialogue writing, it can be writing a limerick. A limerick is basically a funny poem about the incident, or a haiku. So engaging in writing skills as well is something that has helped a lot of people, a lot of adults especially. uh, Basically, like basically engaging your cognitive brain is extremely very important. So setting a routine for yourself has been tremendous. Setting a routine where there is exercise, there is often enough cognitive engagement, where you're solving a puzzle, you're doing you're or
It's
you're
a,
constantly doing something or engaging yourself in something. Getting enough sleep is a part of that routine. Avoiding stimulants like coffee or tea, which cause a lot of anxiety or which cause a lot of trigger, can be something that people can try. um, Journaling your incidents, your
thoughts.
daily life, your daily thoughts, anything that you can find in the day. At the end of the day, writing it down can be really helpful. So these are the few things that of course, like people can do. If of course, if the triggers or the flashbacks of the incidents or the coping does not happen as you wanted to, seeking out to a therapist or a professional is extremely very important. So that they can guide you according to you, and they can tailor sort of tailor a session or tailor a coping mechanism for you. Like we said, it can be a part of your resource kit, which that is something that we do with children so that it is more tangible for them. We build a box where we write down things. We write down the name of a therapist, their best friend, a song they love, a smell they love, and we put it in the box so the child can access it. It can actually help adults as well, so the child can access it whenever they want, whenever they feel like
And they
they
feel
are
the
not.
safety and they feel the
Exactly. So
entire support system.
exactly. Exactly. So yeah, these are few things that we can definitely do in our daily lives to cope with trauma well.
That's great. Aditi, thank you for joining us. Thank you for telling us what is trauma, how trauma informed counselors will help us to actually get out of traumas, what causes traumas, how the brain is impacted. So, all of this actually makes a difference to understand oneself and also for the people who are going through a trauma, say in our family or the loved ones that we know. So, thank you again for joining. And I hope to see you
Thank
again
you.
soon in something
Yes.
interesting more about psychology. So I'll see you.
Yes,
Thank you.
definitely. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.